The next step was to sell this creature to the American people. And the first draft of the Federal Reserve Act was called the Aldrich Bill, sponsored by Senator Aldrich, of course. And this was against the good advice of Paul Warburg, who said, Nelson, if you put your name on this bill, it's going to get voted down in Congress because you are so closely identified with the power of big business. It'll be voted down. And apparently, Aldrich's ego was too big. He must have said, well, no, after all, I'm respected in the Senate, and I am the chairman of the National Monetary Commission. And for whatever reason, he insisted on having his name on it. I think he wanted to go down in history as the originator of the Federal Reserve System. But Warburg was right. Voted down, thumbs down right away, because he was a representative of big business. Well, this was a minor setback. They took their bill, they scrambled the paragraphs around a little bit, they took Aldrich's name off of it, and found a couple of Democrats to sponsor the bill. Now, this was different. See, Aldrich was a Republican, and everyone knew that the Republicans represented big business. But they also knew that the Democrats represented the common man, the little guy, the fellow on the assembly line, you know, like Ted Kennedy. So they found a couple of millionaire Democrats to sponsor the bill. They got Carter Glass from the House and Senator Robert Owen, who was a very successful banker. And now they sponsored the bill. It was the Glass-Owen bill, and this was different. This was a Democrat bill, and it began to receive very popular consideration in Congress. Next, Aldrich and Vanderlip began to give speeches and statements to the press condemning the bill that they had written. They said, this will ruin the banks. This will be terrible for the nation. And by the time this was printed in the newspapers, the average person read that and said, oh, I guess the big bankers don't like this bill very much. It must be pretty good. You know, you have to give these people credit. They were not stupid. They didn't get to be where they were through stupidity. They understood mass psychology, they understood politics, and they played their cards exceedingly well. Next, these same individuals who were condemning the bill were privately financing it. They were behind all the lobbying activities in Washington. They personally paid for the creation of what was called grassroots study clubs that came up all over the country, held public meetings, and disseminated brochures extolling the virtue of the Federal Reserve Act. They gave large amounts of money to some of the better-known universities and created new departments of economics, handpicked their own people to be the professors, to chair those departments, and then those men began to speak publicly and write scholarly essays about how wonderful the Federal Reserve System was. And then, at the insistence of Paul Warburg, who was always the master strategist in this, they added several good provisions to the act. When I say good, I mean provisions which restricted the power of the Federal Reserve System to create money out of nothing. The kind of provisions you and I might have endorsed. And Warburg's associates said, Paul, what are you doing? We don't want those things in there. This is our bill. And his response was classic. He said, relax, fellows, don't you get it? Our object here is to get the bill passed. We can fix it up later. That's exactly what he said. When no one is looking, everyone is focusing on the bill now. Let's get it in. Fix it up later, and indeed he was right. It was because of provisions such as those that they won over the support of William Jennings Bryan, who was the leader of the populist movement, a real defender of the common man, in his mind at least. He looked at that bill, and previously he had opposed it because he said it was the bill of the bankers. They would create money out of nothing, he said. And he looked at those provisions and he said, oh, well, I guess with those in there, I can support the bill. And with the elimination of his opposition, the road was cleared, and it was inevitable. what would happen. They did fix it up later. Since the Federal Reserve Act was passed, it has been amended over 100 times, and nobody has noticed. All of those original provisions, which were sound, were long ago removed, and many, many more have been added, which greatly expand the power and reach of the Federal Reserve System. A big bunch was added back in 1980. It just extends the power of the federal government to areas that you can't even imagine. We're talking previously about being able to create money out of government debt, American government debt. They can now create it out of foreign debt. Any country in the world. Any country in the world can offer a bond, an IOU, and our Federal Reserve System is now empowered by law to convert that into American money. Even corporate debt, they can convert that into American money. There's no limit whatsoever. And nobody has noticed. So Warburg was right. They fixed it up later. And it's no surprise, therefore, that with this kind of professional deception and strategy, that a great deal of support was gained for the bill. And on December 22nd, 1913, it was passed into law and signed into law the next day by President Wilson. And the creature from Jekyll Island finally moved into Washington, D.C.